Good evening and welcome. You are watching Face to Face. Tonight, we will be turning our lens on a space that has redefined how we live, connect, and even clash. And that is social media. This is a place where voices can be amplified, but also silence can be imposed. On the other hand, it connects communities, but also somehow it can deepen divides. Now, at the heart of all of this lies a question that we do not pause often enough to ask. What exactly does it mean to be ethical in this digital age? To help us unpack all of this and more, I'm joined this evening by Deepanjalie Abeywardena, Head of Verity Media and Politics of Virality Research. A very good evening, Deepanjalie. Thank you for joining me this evening.
Thank you for having me.
Deepanjalie, to get our conversation on the road tonight, it's safe to say by now that social media has become a big part of our lives, starting from breaking news to maybe even all these family chats, these videos that we send to each other in our families. How exactly do you see the role of social media shaping how Sri Lankans have learned to connect, communicate, and even think?
Right. Social media has definitely become an integral part of our lives. As you have said, I think there are two crucial roles that the social media is playing, particularly in the context of a Sri Lankan and in their lives. I can say that one, it has become this platform that is driving answerability and accountability. Back in the day, if someone, let's say, if it was a newspaper reader who was reading a newspaper and had a problem with the content that they were consuming, what they can do is to write a letter to the editor. But today, there is the possibility for all of the consumers of this information to immediately hold these traditional power structures accountable. So if you have a problem with any content that you are seeing on TV or on social media or anywhere that is, within the online space, you have that possibility to really hold them answerable. So the ability to drive answerability and accountability is quite a significant aspect that has come with this social media space. That is one, and that's why it has been possible to live fact check presidents. And we have also done that through factcheck.lk that we have under Verity Research. When there's a budget speech, we have live fact checked. So this ability to really hold these traditional power structures is quite important. That's one aspect. Second, platforms such as social media and all of these other apps that we are using have also given us this ability to really raise our concerns and grievances in a way that has not been possible before. Why am I saying this? Is because you may remember that a few years back when QLK happened, it was quite difficult for people to also trust the information that was coming from the legacy media. There have been instances, not just during that period, but where you can no longer trust the information that's coming from legacy media, or where that specific information was suppressed. And in such situations, we have been able to turn to social media space to keep each other informed, to be able to exchange information, and also to have those debates and dissent in a way that was not possible before, in an instant way. So there's this now feedback that we can give in an instant way, and the ability to also hold these traditional political and powerful structures accountable and answerable as well. And I think this is where it has become quite crucial. But because you also spoke about family groups that we have also on various platforms, including WhatsApp, I think it's also quite critical that the way we are using, because we are talking about ethics today, and when people who are using these devices, these methods, when they also think that they are actually trying to safeguard someone's life, and then when they end up forwarding information which is inaccurate, which is distorted and completely not true, that's also creating a lot of issues. So we can keep talking about this, but while that social media has given that space for us to hold each other accountable and keep each other informed, when you don't use it in an ethical way, that also poses questions. So we can keep talking.
We also hear this word ethics a lot when we talk about online behavior. Deepanjali, what exactly does this mean for an ordinary user? Is it about honesty, respect, accountability, like you said, or is it something a lot more complex than that?
Ethics are the most fundamental principle. So ethics would be how you are expected to behave in an offline space, which is exactly that is expected of you when you are in the online space as well. So if you treat someone online with courtesy and consideration and mutual respect and dignity, regardless of their backgrounds and beliefs, that is the integral part of, this ethical conduct that is expected of all of us. And this is where it becomes critical, because when people are when people tend to do or tend to behave in certain ways in the online space, that is contrary to the offline space, because in the offline space you do not have the ability sometimes to be what you are in the online in an unethical way. So people think that when you are behind anonymity, when you use anonymity as a shield of abuse, or when there's toxicity as a weapon of control or influence, that you can get away in the online space. That is not the case. We have to be ethical in our offline and online spaces as well. And the basic principle driving this conduct is where you are basically respectful of each other, and where you're not engaging in a way that's resulting in producing content that is inflammatory or manufacturing content that is completely untrue, that really causes real life harm. That's the basic principle.
Now, in Sri Lanka especially, social media often echoes our views on politics, on gender, ethnicity, all these various topics. It echoes how exactly we view these. And it can also make the divides that we have when it comes to differences on our views much worse. Do you see these platforms as something that can simply reflect our society, or does it actively reshape power, the concept of power and inequality?
I think you are asking about two aspects. One is the reflection, whether social media is a reflection of our society, and then whether it's reshaping new inequalities and new dynamics. So like I said right at the beginning, because now there's this social media space, this digital sphere that's allowing us to exchange information and to engage in political debates and dissent, which are very important, critical for a democratic discourse. It has transformed the public discourse in a tremendous way. And at the same time, when you pose the question whether social media is a reflection of society, this is also reminding me of this debate that you have in the academia as well, whether the media is a reflection of society and vice versa. And it's quite similar. I think when you think of that, yes, online conversations can reflect offline tensions. For example, when you saw what happened in 2018 in Digana and Ampara, and in many such episodes that we have experienced in Sri Lanka, you can see that it's a perpetuation of prejudices towards certain communities and individuals that we see that also get amplified in a social media space. And what you are seeing in offline is what is an extension of social media, and vice versa as well. So it is quite a complex process that we see, and whether what we are seeing, whether social media has also created these inequalities and power dynamics, it's very important to also keep in mind that there's a digital divide globally and locally as well. So globally, there's the north and the global south and global north, where there's a massive disparity in terms of infrastructure and accessibility to all of these this digital sphere and how we are conducting ourselves. And then when it comes to Sri Lanka, within our own country, there's this digital divide as well. Not everyone has access to social media space, and even if you have access, you may not know how to fully utilize it. And I think we have to distinguish between basic computer literacy and digital literacy, as in, just because you know how to make use of a device to access social media, it doesn't make you also an ethical user or a responsible user. So literacy comes with that awareness and understanding. And when you have this platform where people from different walks of life interact with each other, then these dynamics emerge, and there are dynamics in terms of inequalities, like I've explained earlier, and there are also dynamics in terms of where power imbalances are created, especially, let's say, if there's misogynistic content that targets women, and when it is this one specific group that constantly gets bullied by this other group that includes, let's say, males, and then there are these imbalances, there are these inequalities that happen as well, which then inhibit that ability to engage in a democratic discourse, in a conversation effectively the way you want to be. To give you an example, in 2018, we conducted this study. This was a time the quota was introduced for the local government councillors for women. And the study we did was to understand the scale and the size of, the cyberbullying in Sri Lanka. And the stories that we heard from the women who were contesting at the election, it was quite alarming. And I don't think any of that has changed by now, although it has been a few years. What we see is that there's so much of trolling, there's so much of bullying, there's so much of online harassment, and not many people even know how you can, counter these, or how you can really, what steps you can do to mitigate this. And then what happens is that in a space where you get constantly bullied, your voice is completely shut. And that's one of the inequalities that also then creates this imbalance that then doesn't yield that, the outcome that we all expect from spaces such as these that we think will be contributing to the democratic discourse. So that's not a problem that we only face in Sri Lanka, but a worldwide problem. But we can keep discussing.
Virality is something that is very much linked to social media nowadays. Everyone is chasing virality, that quick fame that can, catapult them into stardom. And people with that do not hesitate to express cruelty, make reckless claims, and make rash decisions online, just chasing this concept of virality. And they also make claims that they would never make in front of someone in person, like you said, anonymity, and making hate comments, hiding behind this anonymity is something that is quite commonly seen on social media platforms. Deepanjali, do you view this as a consequence of the structure of social media, how it's structured in a way that extreme behavior patterns are amplified even further?
Right. So I think we have to talk about the structure, the design of these digital platforms as well, from what you're saying. And what we really see from all of this that we are discussing is also that safety has not become a core principle of the design, but it has become an afterthought. But when you're actually designing platforms of this nature, safety for all of these groups that are anyway marginalized in the offline space should be a core principle, because we are also speaking of ethics, and this is one of the core principles that's driving this ethical approach as well. But how we see what is happening in the digital sphere is that it is these spaces are anyway designed to maximize your time spent on social media platforms. So the more time you spend, the more addicted you become, and this is where then everybody starts doom scrolling, or where you are spending time endlessly and mindlessly scrolling down continuously, which then results in a lot of social issues that impact on your mental well-being and on your safety and all of those, and your relationships. So the design of social media platforms is very much to do with that engagement. It is designed to prioritize engagement, and when there is content that generates a lot of likes or shares or followers, that's either positive or negative, that is how traction is then, the traction is happening. And when there is so much of traction is generated to this content, whether it is positive or negative, then the engagement signals to the algorithm that, okay, this is now popular content, and whether it is something really problematic, such as maybe where a woman is beaten by a man, or whether it is someone taking their lives, then that content goes viral. So the way then that information, that content is also amplified, making it visible to a wider audience. And this amplification is a major problem in the way these platforms have been designed. And at the same time, we also see how you are confronted, how you are provided with content, the same content that you have been consuming. So this is the filter bubble where you keep, if you start looking for cake, you will be getting lots and lots of different types of cakes on your feed, and that's exactly how so it can be any content that you are consuming, which is then constantly fed to you. And then what happens from that is you then get into an echo chamber where you are only consuming content that is confirming your biases, that is only compliant with your beliefs, with your ideals, and then you're not even seeing this full spectrum of ideas and other perspectives that are confronting or challenging yours. Even when you are challenged or countered with opposing perspectives, you're not even ready to take that into consideration. So you are in an echo chamber then, which deepens these polarizations in terms of ideologies and linguistic lines and political lines and religious lines. And then this is where all these polarization is deepened, which then has an adverse impact on overall democracy and overall fabric of society. But although amplification and echo chambers and let's say filter bubbles are like some instances that can help, that give you an understanding of how the design can be quite problematic, I have to emphasize also on the way the digital sphere has also been, social media has been helpful for us also in terms of raising our concerns and voices when we have had not that space, like I said earlier, when the information that is supposed to be coming and when the legacy media is also expected to give that full spectrum of opinions, and when it is no longer happening, then you are left with no option but to anyway use this social media space all around you. But at the same time, you have the ability to confront this content, confront problematic content and really hold them accountable, because you have that ability to hold each other accountable, as I said right at the beginning. So we can't overlook confrontation or the ability to drive answerability as well at the same time, irrespective of the way how this content has been designed. But overall, there's this also concept that's quite discussed in the academia, which is called surveillance capitalism, where now you have become raw data. All of your experiences in the social media space, what you're doing, your habits, your preferences, your choices, your tastes, what you like, what you dislike, everything is consumed, everything is used without you knowing to modify and predict behaviors, and you have become raw data without you even understanding in the social media space, which is quite alarming and scary. And I think we have to also be quite cognizant and aware of these limitations and dangers that are coming with the design and how it is being maximized and used as well, for us to know why we should be ethical and why we should be responsible social media users as well.
Now, Deepanjali, you mentioned marginalized communities, women and children specifically. Not just in Sri Lanka, but around the world, these two groups in society have often been disproportionately targeted online, whether it is harassment, bullying, or even exploitation. Who should bear the greater ethical responsibility here? Is it the individuals? Is it the parents or the schools or the platforms themselves that should be held mostly responsible?
The protection of any of those groups should be the overall responsibility of all of us. It's not just one segment in society, from parents to school to all these other institutes. Like all of us, every single person in society is overall responsible for that specific protection. But if you speak of, maybe I have spoken a little bit about women, but if you speak a little bit about children as well, because they are also very much vulnerable in the social media space. But what's also quite disturbing is how they are also put to risk by the people who should also be protecting them, which is their guardians or parents. And parents sometimes, not sometimes, maybe most of the time, they share the life story of their child without their future permissions. So you post pictures and videos of your child, maybe their first day in school, to most embarrassing moments, to everything else they are doing in their life. And now there's a term that is used to refer to this, called sharenting. And which is also quite explaining the extent to which parents strip children of their autonomy over their own narrative. And when you keep posting content of this nature, would these children be actually appreciating that content when they grow up? And also you are putting their lives in danger, because one, you are revealing information about them, and you are releasing content, leaving digital footprints in ways that are completely left permanent in this space, that can be misused and abused by you don't know whom. And sometimes the physical security is also in danger, because when you post a picture of, let's say, your child standing in front of your house, it's very easy to find the location and, do maybe bring physical harm upon the child as well. So I think it's very, very risky that when we use not just social media, anything, without knowing the risks that are also coming with it. And that's where we have to be really speaking of the ethics and the importance of being responsible users. To what extent are you aware of the fact that you have to be completely respecting privacy of individuals, of yourself as well, when you are releasing content into the social media space. So I think this is why it's very important that we have to go back to school curriculum. From there we have to start educating everyone, including children themselves, about how they should be critically consuming what they are confronted with, and how they also conduct themselves in very responsible manners.
Now, this topic of social media and ethics is it's a very deep topic, of course, and this is only the tip of the iceberg, I'd like to say. There's so much more to be discussed, but we'll be heading into a short commercial break now. Stay with us. This is Face to Face.
A trusted place for your fixed deposits. Valuable FD, 10.25% for 15 months, 11% for 24 months. Valuable FD, the symbol of stability.
Asia Cup 2025. 4 days more.
අපි ඇත්තටම නපුරු පිටසක් කොලෙක් මේ ලෝකෙට ගෙන්නමු.
හවස පාමාට්ටම ගෙන්නමුද?
දැන් ඉක්මනටම නපුරු පිටසක්වල ජීවීන් හොයන්න ඕනේ.
මේ ඔයා යාට තේරුම් කරන්නකෝ.
Welcome back. This is Face to Face. I'm in conversation this evening with Deepanjalie Abeywardena, Head of Verite Media and Politics of Verite Research. And our topic of conversation is on reclaiming ethics online. Deepanjalie, we were discussing about marginalized communities, about women and children, and how they're targeted on social media, how they're harassed on social media. I want to specifically turn our attention to children, because we live in a very unfortunate era where parents or guardians use their children to generate content which online translates to more money. What kind of an ethical dilemma does this raise about consent, privacy, and the future rights of this child who is being shown online?
Yeah, that's actually connecting to what we were discussing earlier as well, because the moment you release content of a child to the social media space, you know that they are not in a position to give their consent yet, and you are doing this without having their future permissions. So when you endanger a child with online risks, physical safety, and also about feelings of inadequacy of themselves when they grow up because of this content that is also circulated. Those are posing serious questions on mental well-being and also physical well-being as well. So the ethical issue that is here is that the way we have not been probably taught to respect each other's privacy and consent. Consent is still very much a strange concept in society like ours, where people do not fully capture that idea. So now, for example, journalists are trained to always interview or to publish content in ways that you will always seek approval or consent prior to really publishing something as much as possible. And if you apply the same principle, because the ethical aspect, the core principle of journalism is also minimizing harm, minimizing damage. But because right now, all of us have the ability to post anything instantly on social media, and that's where we should respect each other's boundaries. Are we actually going to post this content without seeking are we actually going to post anything that is not properly, where it is not consulted with that person? And when it involves a minor who does not have the ability to give that consent, then how fair is it? How just is how just is that when you are seeking when you're not in a position to seek that permission?
The concept of power dynamics in society.
Exactly, because you are a parent or a guardian and you are in a position to do whatever you think you can because that's your child, which is not the case. So this is why we have to be very mindful of not stripping that autonomy of that child and over their own narratives, and to always think whether this child is going to appreciate this content that they are seeing of themselves when they grow up. And what you are touching on has, I think, two aspects. One, where you post content because you want to share certain moments with everyone, where you also share content hoping to get that virality or hoping to get those likes and shares and comments, and that's where, once again, that ethical component is very much important, because one, we have to be extremely respectful of each other's boundaries and privacy, and always think whether this action, when you are going to hit this button, when you are going to post this something that you think is going to be viral, how ethical is that content? That's the basic question you have to ask. And this is why we are also, through ethics side that we are running under Virality Media and Politics, we constantly talk about certain basic steps that we all can follow when we are in the online space. One, think before you share, post before you forward, because once again, even when you are sharing your content on WhatsApp, it may be of your child's content, it may be you may be thinking that when you are forwarding content on WhatsApp, thinking that you are actually protecting someone from, you are preventing someone from falling ill in future. For example, there's lots of medical related content that you get on WhatsApp. If you eat this many pineapples, you will not get cancer. This is all, part of the problem. It's intertwined. You think that you are actually not causing any harm, but you are ultimately causing harm, because you manufacture or you circulate information which you don't know is true. And when it is the information that is very much relevant to your family or your children, you also put them in harm, put them at risk without knowing where this content is going to go. So it's very important to think whether you are actually going to cause harm to anyone's life by doing what you are going to do. And the counter argument that you would get is that oh, I thought I would, like I was doing someone a service by forwarding this information. But please stop before forwarding any information. That I'm connecting it to what you asked about children as well, because it's all, like ultimately connected, intertwined.
Yes.
Because when you think that you're forwarding something that you think is completely harmless, have you checked whether this is substantiated by reliable sources? And is this content mostly triggering maybe very strong emotions? Usually such content that is also quite sensationalized is not true most of the time. And have you taken the time to really do a basic Google research, like a search, to find out whether this specific item or news item that you are sharing, this piece of information you are sharing, whether this is true? And maybe there are already reliable fact-checking initiatives out there that have already done their due diligence. So it's a matter of digging some information to ensure that what you have done, what you're going to share, is actually whether it is verified or not. So if you integrate these basic steps into your life, I think whether it is your children or whether somebody else that are not even in your family, you will still be that ethical, responsible user who's not jeopardizing anybody's life. And that's the core principle, the basic principle that we all have to embrace.
Now, we've been talking about ethics on social media, but how ready is Sri Lanka to navigate this digital space in a responsible manner? From understanding misinformation to recognizing manipulation that is quite often happening on social media these days. Are we promoting social media literacy enough in our country, Deepanjali? If not, what can we do to promote it better?
That's a very critical area that we have to focus on, because as much as access we have to social media space, I don't think we have access to literacy. We have access to avenues that help us educate ourselves on how we can be these ethical and responsible users. The platforms themselves have community guidelines that are not effectively implemented. But then how are we going to be ensuring that we know what we are aware, we are cognizant of how we should be conducting ourselves? And that's why I said right at the beginning as well that this should be something that we should be teaching from school. It should be basic ethical usage of social media, and critical consumption of news should be a core component of our school curriculum, so that everyone who's coming out of school knows, one, how they should be critically consuming information, so they are not falling prey to misinformation or disinformation or this large umbrella that is referred to as information disorder. And second, they can also educate others, and they can also be quite ethical users themselves, so that minimizing all this risk and damage and all these issues that we are talking about. But to what extent that is happening is a question. I know there are certain organizations that are working on these. So Ethics Eye of Verity Media and Politics is talking about ethics by using legacy media and also their social media platforms as much as possible, because ethics, whether it is legacy media or social media, ethics are ethics, and ethics have to be applied in all of these instances in our lives. And so from school curriculum to then we have to also really target certain communities and communities outside of Colombo, within Colombo. And when you see the content that you are receiving from people whom you think are educated, may not be actually falling into these boxes that I'm speaking of. Have they been fact-checked? Have they been verified? Because this is a separate practice that we have to adopt by actively speaking of why we should be extremely careful and cautious before we share something or forward something. And we also live in a country where legacy media has also been the manufacturer of information disorder, meaning mis and disinformation. They have also been the producer of mis and disinformation. So we have several battles here where information disorder is coming not only from the digital sphere but also from the legacy media that people tend to trust. And because I spoke of that digital divide earlier in Sri Lanka, which makes it quite difficult for people to also equally access these, and also they may be also left out of these discussions, important public conversations, because they don't have access, and they also don't know how to critically consume this information as well. So there are different segments in society who are falling behind the basic ethics and basic education around this. So while we have been doing some work around this, I don't think it's ever enough, and there's so much that we have to keep talking about. And when you now also look at the way how social media is also misused, because you can now see, despite the community guidelines being there, despite some of the content being demoted, that's a separate question that we can talk about, like whether it's happening effectively or not. But despite all of this, people have also invented or come up with shortcuts to get around these. There are shortened acronyms you may have seen that are used that actually refer to profane language, that refer to extremely like content that should not be out there. So when people keep using this and they are misusing what is there to really target someone, troll someone, bully someone, that creates that brings this enormous pressure on someone, really resulting in mental pain, psychological pain. Then the question we have to ask is, are you being that ethical user? So I don't think we can also be passive, we can't be passive recipients who also watch this happening. Because the public discourse has tremendously transformed itself as they have given us this access to social media, we have now become these active recipients of information, which was not the case, some time back, as I said earlier. So then, are we actually also being responsible by confronting this content and taking enough steps to intervene with this and really calling them out to stop what they are doing? Because it can be content targeting women, it can be content targeting certain specific communities, which results in incitement to violence. So this is why it is extremely important that we have to be ethical users. And the question you're asking about whether we are adequately equipped to really combat this issue of information disorder and this issue where people do not know how to use this space quite ethically, that's something we have to keep discussing, and that's something we have to also keep intervening in.
Now, Deepanjali, in Sri Lanka, we have a certain piece of legislation that is set to come out, the Online Safety Act, to govern online spaces, but the public trust in this remains fragile still. From your perspective, what kind of principles should guide the laws that aim to regulate social media, digital platforms, while also not silencing dissent?
For any piece of legislation, some of the core principles that can guide them are, several. One, it should be devoid of ambiguity. The moment you have ambiguous language, there's the possibility for you to really misuse it and abuse it. And that's a question that has also been posed about some of the content in this act as well. So avoiding that ambiguity around language is very important, because if you have, let's say, quite strict penalties or restrictions by misusing something very trivial because there's this ambiguity around a certain phrasing, around a certain provision, that's creating chilling effect on, engaging in that democratic debate in a country. That's one. Second, you also should have accountability and, like transparency. There should be the ability to see, for example, if it is a social media platform, how are they moderating their content? What content are they demoting? How much time are they taking in order to take this content out or demote it? And what is the mechanism through which they are publishing this? Is this information shared with researchers, for them to engage in research that can really that can provide insights, deeper insights into understanding this issue? And that accountability is very much important to understand how you have, certain legislation, whether it's also yielding that, whether it is really driving that impact or outcome that you want it to happen. And at the same time, I think one other principle is also where it should be where the penalty should be proportionate to the harm that is caused. If you have this really severe penalty for something so trivial, and then that's extremely difficult, because that's something that you should have, let's say, for incitement of violence, which is extremely grave. And so if you follow these principles and also make sure that your oversight mechanisms are independent of political interference. So this is one issue that we see coming all throughout our history, and that is why people always approach with, people always weave regulation with so much suspicion and skepticism, because especially when it involves media, every attempt that we have seen in the past to regulate content is also triggering these fears surrounding it, because it has been about silencing or really not allowing that space to raise your voices or which is kind of preventing that freedom of expression, which should not be the case. So it's in that historical context that we have to always understand these pieces of legislation that we have. And the core principle that should be applied for any of these legal provisions is that we should always make sure that it does not hinder freedom of expression. It does not prevent us from having that democratic discourse. It should not disable that democracy that we all value so much. And that's the main principle that should be driving all of this as well. So I don't want to go into detail in the OSA. That can be a separate conversation. There are lots of those who are anyway working on that content as well, who show that there are provisions that are duplicating with what is already in existence, and the loopholes around it. But I think, because now one other critical issue is also that it's these harms, it's these negative consequences that I'm speaking of, which are highlighted to also get attention and traction around these legal, legal interventions as well. This is why ethics are important, because not every issue can be solved through legal means. Education and ethics, when they are combined together, they can really help you establish that society, achieve that society where everyone can respect each other. So I'm going back to that question you asked about, what are these ethics in an online space? They are the fundamental principle. They are basically about how you treat someone online as much as how you treat someone offline. So if we can apply that basic principle, and if you prevent yourself from doing something that you do not want someone else to do to yourself, that's all that matters. And that's the core principle that we should be looking at.
Now, we know about the core principles that this kind of a piece of legislation should be based on. And it's also important to note that by now the Ministry of Justice and National Integration has called for public input until the 13th of this month with regard to the online safety bill. For anyone who wants to contribute to this, Deepanjali, how do you think they can use this moment to help balance genuine safety concerns on social media platforms while also preserving the freedom of expression?
I would say that the core objective is always safeguarding democratic discourse. So if you keep safeguarding democratic discourse in mind as the ultimate objective and ensuring freedom of expression, which is once again critical for us, anything that you then do around those to safeguard those will be your guiding light in this specific moment.
Also, now, Deepanjali, we discussed earlier how social media usually thrives on validation, virality, views, likes, whatever it is. For young people, this often creates kind of pressure, anxiety, or maybe it could ultimately lead to something as deep as depression even. Do you see this as a private matter for families to manage, or an ethical failure of these platforms to begin with?
it takes us back to what we were speaking of, algorithm, and how it is amplifying that content, which is, which may not be necessarily positive. And this also takes us back to what I said about how children feel inadequate about themselves when they are constantly exposed to social media content, because social media is designed in a way that is working on that, where engagement is prioritized. And it is also designed in ways where you are only publishing content that involves only your best moments in life. But we all know that's not how life works. And we all have our ups and downs, and we go through valleys and hills. And when children are brought up in ways, like where they are constantly exposed to social media, and where they start comparing themselves with their peers, and when they feel extremely inadequate about how they look, how they feel about themselves, and that takes a toll on their confidence. And that's then definitely creating that massive issue around, like your mental health being, mental well-being as well. The mental health is also quite an important aspect in our day-to-day life. And this is something we always constantly see in legacy media as well, where there's, there are specific principles and guidelines with regard to how you report on suicide, for example. And Ethics Eye shows on a very frequent basis how very few media channels or newspapers really take the time to publish a helpline or really ethically, responsibly report on this. So it's a bigger issue. It's about one, how much do we know about our ethics in terms of, conducting ourselves in ways that we don't jeopardize our children? How much do we know about doom scrolling that can really end up in creating that environment which is extremely negative for your children? And then how much do we know where to turn to seek help? So when all of these are combined, and if we have had that knowledge about, that understanding about what ethics should be guiding us, how ethically we should be conducting ourselves, most of these problems can, I think, be solved without really worrying about it. So that's why we have to go back to our question on education. How much are we doing enough to really promote literacy, to educate each other about how we use these tools, for which purpose? And when you sometimes see certain comments and certain engagement on specific groups that we have spoken of, including children and women, it poses serious questions about where people are coming from and why they think that these are individuals that they can easily, they can easily target. Why have they become these certain groups where you can easily unleash your violence upon? Because violence is also quite normalized in the way how news media and all of these other news channels and how the print media are also reporting about it. So in an environment where all of these aspects are normalized and not ethically reported, then these issues are inevitable. And that's why we have to go back to your question on what can we do about, educating each other. That's quite critical.
Well, tonight's conversation has reminded us that social media is not just about technology. It's also about people, choices, and the values that we carry into the digital space. And well, these platforms may be global, yes, but their effects can be very much local. They shape our politics, our children, and our futures as well. Thank you very much, Deepanjalie, for joining me this evening. It was wonderful to have you back on the show. Thank you for sharing insights.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you very much, dear viewer, for joining us this evening. This is Face to Face. Take care. Good night.
TV1. TV for life.
18 injured in Alla bus accident remain hospitalized. 2 admitted to ICU.